Hey everybody, today I am going to be reviewing West Side Story, the remake. It is directed by Steven Spielberg. I don't even know how to begin this. I just saw this movie less than 2 hours ago. I got out of it. So this is a very fresh review. Obviously, as a lot of people know, West Side Story is a huge part of my life and has been before I can remember. Musically, artistically, it just inspired me. You know, it's a big reason why I do a lot of the things that I do. So this was an important one to check out. As a musical, the music is the greatest of all time. Or none. It's the greatest of all time. Compared to, say, a lot of the more American standard Broadway musicals. The Rodgers and Hammersteins, the Comden and Greens, even just like the Cole Porters, those people, all amazing. Amazing. And people that I listen to all the time. They are not Leonard Bernstein, who did the music, of course, to West Side Story. It's just more complex. It's very elevated and more sophisticated than what you're used to, I think, and definitely a symphonic masterpiece. I really consider it more to be like an opera and a ballet, disguised as just like a typical American musical. And it's always weird to see it lumped in with like Oklahoma or The Sound of Music, because to me it's so beyond those. Leonard Bernstein is one of the greatest composers of the 20th century. And he somehow was able to fuse Latin and jazz and like 20th century kind of experimental, classical, and kind of Americana, you know, style of melody in a way that is just, no matter what you do, you're not going to match it. The original film did not match the brilliance of Leonard Bernstein. Certainly this new one didn't match it. But you can try your best. When I first heard that Steven Spielberg was going to be the one to make the film, you know, I was interested, but I was also kind of perplexed just because, I don't know, I never really associated him with something like musicals, naturally, because he's never made any. And it's not to say anything of his directing. I think he comes from a period where, you know, he kind of understands the ability to shoot grand, you know, musical set pieces and musical performances very well. And he has a real kinetic sense of you know, just movement and everything in his films. That part didn't worry me. It was more just kind of, I guess, his aesthetic, you know, like he's known for more of that monochromatic kind of color grading in his movies. And West Side Story is full of color and heat and passion and intensity. There's real grit to it. There is a sexuality, especially to like the Latin rhythm and everything. And, you know, Spielberg is not sexy, and I mean that in terms of just his films. His films are not sexual. He's not sexual as an artist, and you know, he's been very honest about that. It's not his thing. But then there's the other question, which I ask a lot about remakes, is why remake it? What about it makes you feel like you need to retell it for the modern day? And especially when the movie was good the first time. You know, the original movie certainly has its flaws. I have reviewed it. I'll put a link for it below. But, you know, it was a strong kind of representation of the 1960s musical, you know, like the proper Cinerama experience. A time that was post-RKO and MGM musicals of the 30s, 40s, and 50s, more the meta let's put on a show type musicals and going for something a little bit more expansive. And now, having seen the new one, I can tell you that I think Spielberg did a good job, a very good job for his first musical. You would have never known this was his first musical because it is a proper film. It's very cinematic. It's really gritty, which surprised me because, you know, I think with Spielberg, he had a sense of grit and tangibility in his earlier films, particularly in the 70s and 80s. Not so much later in his career, he went a little bit soft. But yeah, this properly feels violent. Ironically, it's a musical, but he's got it back here. It's beautifully shot for the most part as well, and I think it captures kind of this historical nostalgia very, very well. Obviously, Spielberg is wonderful at capturing nostalgia. He's been great at it ever since, you know, the beginning of his career. But he really captures a sense of like a significance, cultural significance of these old musicals. But it feels fresh, and it has a thrilling sort of energy to it at times. And again, for someone who's never made a musical, he does feel right at home, and I think part of that is because musicals are just a fundamental part of American cinema. I know a lot of people don't really want to believe that, but it's true. I think if you can make a good musical, a musical that is convincing, I think that's very commendable. It is a very abstract genre that is very, very ambitious in a lot of ways, and it's very hard to capture these days, especially in a more literal and more cynical age. But I think that Spielberg found a pretty good balance there. He did actually bring in more literal aspects and more cynical aspects of the modern era to the forefront of this particular particular version of the film, and he's reimagining the story, and the script definitely shifts things around, so it does feel a little bit more relatable to today. And watching the film, I did have a constant sort of, it's a give and take sort of thing. Some things it does really, really well, better than the original, and other things it doesn't do so well. So I kind of felt myself going like this all the way through it. And so at the end of it, both movies have their pros and their cons, but they're pretty close together. I naturally am more drawn to the original and the aesthetic and just the filmmaking of it and the way it builds more than this one, but I gotta give credit where credit is due. The opening of the original West Side Story, I think, is it is the greatest opening to any American musical film I have ever seen in my life, and it is also just one of my favorite openings ever. I'm obsessed with it, and I was most excited to see that. I wanted to see how they were going to begin the film. It has to be a really staccato, a big statement. And when this new one opens, it feels modern. It feels apocalyptic. It resonates. It definitely sunk its hook in me from the very beginning, even though I do feel like this one did lack a lot of that building tension of that original one. The way that one builds, the silences, the time it takes, it really does take its time to build to that climax. It does feel like a modern Western, except, the landscape is not some big field. It's an urban background. Though this one still did have all of those things that I mentioned, that it keeps, very consistently, the sense of violence, the sense of brutality, and this adrenaline that is essential to that opening. I think I'm going to start, though, talking about the things that I absolutely love about this film. And I think these are the things that I think get better than the original. And it was like, thank you. Because there were so many times I would watch the original and hope that there could be something better about it. And that is Riff. Riff in this film is amazing. He is above everybody else in the cast. I really do believe that. The actor it's the perfect face. It's rough. It's very kind of, classic American boy. He looks like John Mulaney mixed with this Irish street kid from the Bronx or something. I never liked Russ Tamblyn as Riff. I thought he was one of the weaker additions to the main ensemble in the original film. This guy is so on another level than him. I mean, he really adds all of the complexity that I want in a Riff. He's a character who's clearly very much in pain. He's a sad character. You really feel for him, but you also know that he's a lost soul, a tragic soul who is going to be helpless in the end. And I found that to be the greatest tragedy of all. I mean, really, I find myself always more drawn to the supporting players in West Side Story because, let's be honest, Tony and Maria are boring. But yeah, this guy just found the perfect way to ease into the humor, but also ease into the seriousness, be subtle while also be very kind of humorous and charismatic and still have that musical spirit. And he can, go into a dance number, go into a song, and you believe him. And I really wanted the movie to be about him fully the whole time. This guy, I feel like he deserves a supporting Oscar nomination. He's that good. And of course, he's like the Mercutio of the story. He's not going to make it. And I always had that at the back of my mind, as soon as he died, I was like, oh, the movie instantly got less enjoyable for me. Absolutely. And I do think, yes, he is the best part of the movie. He is the best Jet, naturally. But, the Jets overall do have a feeling to them that I found very interesting. One of my big complaints about the original film are the Jets and the performances and how they're really kind of stuck in this very dated sense of performing that doesn't feel, they don't feel convincing as a gang. Of course, it's hard to be a gang in a musical, but I really think that West Side Story has the kind of power to it and pathos that you can make it believable if you want to. And here it's they are going for the theatrical quality to it. Honestly, they feel like the Dead End Kids from Angels with Dirty Faces or something. I didn't do nothing. They have that kind of humor to them, but they are very angsty and they really, you can just feel they're spazzing out all the time. They're violent. They're very hormonal. They're just young kids. They're delinquents. Yes, very dramatic and very over the top, but I don't know. I found myself buying into it a lot more than I bought into it in the original. The original, they are really, really annoying. And even when it comes to the dancing, of course, the original is done by the great Jerome Robbins, and here it's done by Justin Peck, I believe, from New York City Ballet. But the dancing has a quality to it that is, very gritty as well. It's right on the edge. And I always say there's a fine line between martial arts and dancing. But at the same time, they're very close together. There's a sense of elegance and technique and an ability to be light on your feet. All of those things are included in dance. And so, you know, it's finding that line and being able to cross over it very easily is the key with West Side Story. And because these characters are so on the edge, just skirting that line between, you know, full brutality and just, you know, being young boys is very important to the film. And so to me, it's like you've got to find the meaning just in your body for why you're doing the movement is very crucial. You have to find a meaning for the slide. You have to have a meaning for the lunge. Everything's important. The choreography does feel, just like most modern musicals do today, too chaotic at times. It just feels very spastic. I think there's good movements going on there. Of course, it's, you know, done by a very good choreographer, a commendable choreographer. But, you know, like I said this about In the Heights, the same thing. I like there to be more clarity in the movements. There's more clarity in the Jerome Robbins movement. It tells a story much easier. And I like kind of the focus on like one singular movement that can kind of carry, and you build kind of a whole set piece around that movement, letting a moment breathe, creating some color and accents, letting it kind of bloom and then contract. All of these things I think are very important, and I think they're captured better in the old musicals. The artistry is just more interesting for me. And Maria here is also very good, and I had, you know, a pretty good feeling about her as well, the actress who plays her. And, you know, Maria is just, you know, she's a character who is very angelic and, you know, wide-eyed and charming and fresh. There's a spirited openness to her. She's the hope. You know, she really is kind of meant to be the hope of the film, I guess you could say. And I love the way that she's introduced here, you know, in that white dress, and she's standing on the fire escape, which is very gray and grimy by contrast. And so she's really like this light. She also has kind of beautiful soprano vocals that, you know, it works very well for her. I think she nailed it. I think she nailed pretty much everything about the character. And Ansel Elgort here, of course, plays Tony. And when I first heard that and I saw Baby Driver, I thought, that's a really good choice. I figured just do what you did in Baby Driver and you will be totally fine. Because Baby Driver is like this heist action movie, but it's very much mixed with a lot of musical sensibilities. It really does feel very much like a musical, that film. And he has that musical spirit within him. So I thought, yeah, good choice. I know a lot of people don't like him in the film. I tend to defend him a little bit more. I'll be honest with you, I never liked Tony as a character. I just don't think he's very well written, just, you know, on a basic level. I think that he was never believable as somebody who could be like the leader of a gang. Absolutely not. He always came off as kind of a pussy. And I'll just say it's like that in almost every version. He's certainly like that in the stage version as well. But yeah, and Richard Beamer played him in the original film, and I know this was not his choice, so I don't like to fault him for the performance he gave in West Side Story. He was told to be very, you know, over the top that way, and he didn't want to, but he certainly does play it, that very sensitive, dreamy sort of guy. I know he's supposed to be playing somebody in love, but that transition doesn't really exist where we see somebody who's like this hardened gang leader who is softened by love, and I think that is very important. But what I like about Elgort is that he, you know, he's very understated kind of performer. And I like that for Tony. I like that he's, you know, again, he's more kind of hardened and calloused, but, you know, we can bring out a sort of a gentle sensitivity in him very subtly. He's understated, quiet, kind of shy. And I don't know, there's something charming about that to me. I think he gives you somewhere to go. He gives you a place to build from, and that can be very intriguing from a cinematic sense. But I will say I didn't like his singing. I think that Tony is a very hard part to play, and it requires somebody who can really handle that kind of music. Because, yeah, like you just have to have a great command of the voice. There's a lot going on, especially in a song like Maria. It's just so melodic and beautiful, and you've got to capture all of those accents, the phrasing, and he just doesn't have it. He feels very flat. So I didn't feel the musical portions, I think, for Tony as much. But I do like that they gave him more of a backstory. I mean, you know, it's hinted at for sure, but here it's like, no, he went to prison and he's like, you know, trying to be reformed here. It's always a struggle between him wanting to return to his old life, and also wanting to find a future that is better for him. But yeah, I was full on, you know, ready to defend him the whole movie until like the last 5 minutes. And I was like, oh no. When he has to really show emotion, I didn't buy it at all. It felt laughable and cartoony, and and the thing is that ending's got to be really, you know, it's a big moment, and it felt a little bit flat for me. weirdly, I found myself more drawn to the original Richard Beamer performance, and I don't like that performance at all, but just in terms of when he finds the news and he runs out yelling for Gino, I don't know, I feel it a little bit more. Overall, when I look at this movie, I do think that it kind of consistently has that cinematic thread all the way through it, and that's one thing that I kind of felt was lacking, as I said before, in the original. There are things in the original that I think are, amazing, so cinematic, and then other parts of it that just kind of feel standard and they feel kind of lacking or uninspired. They feel more kind of like a typical 1960s musical. I do think that the musical numbers overall are better in the original, but I will say one that I really liked in this one was the G Officer Krupke number. They kept it in the first half, just like in the original Broadway show. And here they changed the setting. It's not in front of Doc's store, but it's at the police station. And it just had a wonderful kind of buzzing energy about it that really gave you a sense of what these kids are like. And yeah, it's just like a nice little humorous interlude. I also thought that America was a pretty cool number because it was reimagined to be more kind of lively, more vivacious. Again, I worried about Spielberg and, capturing a lot of that Latin rhythm and flavor. I didn't worry about it so much with the Jets. I was, pretty confident for him there, but, I was worried about that a little bit. And it's true, it's not as pungent, but it's still very solid. I like that they took America to the streets and they made it kind of like a big grand musical number in the old school sense. It's big and colorful, crane shots and all. And I actually like this version better than the original Broadway show version, which is just done between the ladies, which is nice, but I like that they, made it more kind of epic here. My favorite is still the movie version, which is a little bit more intimate, but I like that it's a little bit sexy and playful, all of those things. I like that the dynamic is between the Latin boys and the Latin girls. It brings us into the characters' lives a little bit more. We get a sense more of who they are by keeping those musical numbers kind of in that proximity, I should say. And that's also kind of a problem. And this is hard to talk about because I know I just said that I think that Spielberg is very cinematic overall, and I do. But part of what I'm about to say is going to contradict that because yes, it is very cinematic. It's got a lot more life to it than most Spielberg movies of the past several years, I would say. And yet I wanted more of that artistry to exist here. I wanted more of those abstract, surreal moments to be showcased that are known in musicals. Musicals are a great time to give us this kind of, we're, partially in reality and we're partially in this fantasy world. And I think there's such a creativity to that, watching kind of reality blend into the background and then going into this beautiful fantasy. And I do find the transitions and everything much more creative and much more interesting for me in the original. A good example would be like, the gym dance when Maria and Tony first make eye contact, and it becomes this kind of surreal moment that involves, all of the dancers, or at least, some of the dancers on stage in a way that is really beautiful. And it's like there is a beautiful blend of everything there that I just really respond to. And this one just doesn't quite have that. But again, it's more going for a literal, more cynical age. But at the same time, I would have liked to see a little bit more of that poetry as well. When you have something really dynamic like that and very powerful, it really kind of breaks up a lot of the monotony. Otherwise, when it comes to musicals, you run the danger of those musical numbers running together in your mind. And I do think that this film does kind of fall into that category to a degree, once it gets maybe a little bit more into the middle and then into the third act. And also, I will say, I wish the visual shots here weren't so broken up. And again, a lot of that is just, this is contemporary filmmaking. I complain about that all the time. But I just miss when we could really let a singular shot breathe and kind of bring us in a way, hook us in, where you get a sense of the dancers' movements. I love how in the original film, there's a lot of backstories going on all throughout the frame, and you kind of have to pick them out, and you kind of see a whole piece kind of come together in that way. Whereas this one is more kind of standard like cut, 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 cut. It's still Spielberg, so there is like a real technique to it, and it is very good compared to a lot of directors letting the movement tell the story and not the camera. I always think that that is key. But yeah, I think overall, we needed more, even though the set pieces in this and everything, it's a very expensive movie. It looks expensive. I just wanted more set pieces that kind of distinguish themselves a little bit more, were a little bit more separate and kind of stop you in your tracks. I'll give you a good example. Cool in this movie. did not work for me. That is also reimagined. It is in the first half of the film, which is like the original Broadway show, and I don't like that. I always liked that the movie moved that number into the second half because it is so just like it's brassy and it's just so dynamic, and it feels like that kind of showstopper that, you know, really needs to exist in the second half to give it some balance right before that, you know, tragic ending. Cool in the original movie is my second favorite part of the whole movie. The opening's the best part. Cool is easily the second best part. It is just, go and watch it on YouTube as well. Watch the opening and watch the Cool number and compare and contrast them to this this new version. I just love that you have all of these teenagers who have been through something really traumatic, and, you know, they've got a lot of anger and the testosterone and the hormones are going crazy. And so they need to calm down in this moment. It's like, no, you have to be cool. You cannot afford to be immature anymore because this is real danger. And I love how they frame that in the second half for the movie. You want to talk about a showstopper, that is it. It's like underground, and all you really have are the car lights, and everything else is about the movement. It's fantastic. And here I know they wanted to give Tony a little bit of a moment and kind of, you know, bring in his struggle a little bit more, but I just don't think that Cool was the right way to showcase it. It just didn't feel like it worked. And it also did feel monotonous. It felt like just another musical number. I also don't like how they used I Feel Pretty in this film. You know, I know what they're doing. Again, like the G Officer Krupke number used to be in the second half. So it's like, it's a weird interlude. It's like this humorous interlude after a really dark moment. It's like that Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, you know, type of mentality, that Romeo and Juliet mentality. But I don't know, it just never quite worked for me in West Side Story. And using I Feel Pretty here, like this moment of being so in love and everybody's happy right after something really horrible happened, it just doesn't feel right. I know it's going maybe for the irony, but it doesn't work. It just, that's such a joyous number. It belongs, I believe, in the first half. I didn't care for Bernardo in this film. The original George Chakiris, he's just so much better than, you know, I think the majority of that ensemble. He internalizes everything. He's so believable. He does so little here, and that you can feel all that intensity brewing. But here, he's just, I don't know, he doesn't have much presence. He's kind of doe-eyed and kind of dopey-eyed, I guess you could say, and he just fell flat for me. I actually think Anita here is very good. She's very strong, good handle on the part, and you really need to, absolutely. So I have no problems with her. It's just, she's not Rita Moreno. And having Rita Moreno in the film and having that weird kind of meta crossover thing, you can't help but think about it. Constantly seeing Rita Moreno in the film, I can't help but remember her performance and just how, yes, she is the spirit of West Side Story. She is why I think the original works in terms of the emotional resonance of it. She just has this special spark. She stole every moment she was in. And I'm talking about when she was the original Anita in the original 1960s film. And I think ultimately that's the key, is Rita Moreno in here. She's really the symbol, I think, for why Spielberg decided to take this on, why he decided to make a remake of something this iconic. Because it's like, yes, is it necessary? No. But it is a classic Shakespearean tragedy, and a lot of the themes, whether it's like, you know, the politics, whatever, it resonates in every single generation. And it's how can you bring that into the modern day so that it does resonate, while also understanding that Spielberg comes from a very different time. He comes from the old school, you know, like film school brat generation. So he has this sort of romantic love affair with the past, with nostalgia, also understanding that his time is fading. And that's the feeling I get from this movie, is like, you know, it has all of the emotion and like the grand kind of spectacle of those old movies, but it's also very much in your face. It's very modern. And there's that pain of the past fading into the rearview mirror. Honestly, it kind of reminded me weirdly of like Scorsese's The Irishman, which is also somebody, I think, accepting that their time is over. You know, the time of when these great movies could be made is over. And it is very sad, but it's also very interesting seeing that point of view from somebody like that. So yeah, you know, I like the movie, I do. You know, it's not brilliant. It has its flaws, but I think overall, I think they did a really good job here. You know, they took it seriously. If you really love like a cinematic experience, I think this is one. It really did feel like the kind of things we love to go to the movies for. And so, you know, that's exciting. But that is my review. Thank you guys so much for watching. I'm going to plug my website as always. It is deepfocuslens.com. I am an artist and I do commission portraits and I sell prints of my work. If that is something that you're interested in, you can always go to the website below. And if you have a question about a commission or a print, you can always email me. My email is in the description box below as well. Also, I'd like to give a shout out to my patrons. Thank you guys so much for all of your support. If you are interested in becoming a patron, the link to support that is below, as well as the rest of my social media information. You can watch more videos here, and you can subscribe if you'd like. Catch you next time.